Welcome back to the channel where I'm on a quest to make 16 magical Minecraft map art machines. Today we unlock checkers. Hey there poster people. Today I would like to show you my latest map art creation, a fully functional checkers game in vanilla Minecraft, using a poster display that doesn't require special commands, mods, texture packs, or data packs. And no, you don't need a computer science degree or possess a higher Redstone education. So if I can build this, then you can too. In this video, we will go through every step of the process from prototyping, through problem solving, to playing. So let's start by defining what we know. We already know the goal of making a vanilla Minecraft checkers game. The biggest feature is the poster display like this one. A single aesthetic interface shared by both players. We're also going to have the game board set itself when the game starts, and clear itself when the game ends. It's important to understand the redstone flow in the planning stage as much as possible. So let's start a flowchart. I like to think of redstone as a series of inputs and outputs. So let's reverse engineer, or rather reverse redstone, by starting with the display cells. The display cells become our final output. Now we can input other redstone components as we think about how the game works. Each display cell will have black and red tokens, controlled by a player selector to know which token is in play. Each token has the ability to move in 4 directions, unless it is touching a border, so we will need a 4-way directional controller. In checkers, if a token reaches the opposite side, it is crowned. So there needs to be a crowning component. We also need to select which tile we are playing from, so there has to be a tile selector. That's essentially it to the gameplay, but we still need to be able to clear the board by resetting the player selectors that control the display cells. To set the board, we just have to activate the correct player selectors at the start. Now we can run our beginning inputs to the set, reset, tile selector, and player selector circuits. With a plan laid out, we can better understand how the redstone might work. I say might because this is a visual equivalent of a brainstormed outline, and we don't know what the final redstone looks like, but this helps us see the logic and the steps we need to take. By breaking the redstone machine into parts, we can build it one part at a time, so let's get started. Here we are at the beginning of it all, starting with the board design. This part was easy. Since a checkers board is 8 by 8 squares, a Minecraft map is 8 by 8 chunks, so we just color every other chunk light gray. If you are wondering why I am choosing light gray and white over the classic red and black, it is because red and black will make it difficult to see the black men. And yes, checker pieces are called men. 14 block white circles represent the men in checkers, and next we need to layer these. Layering does 2 things. First, it gives us a place to hide blocks when they are not active by tucking them under the bottom of the next layer. And secondly, layering gives us space to build redstone. We can activate the block pixels by one-ticking a sticky piston with an observer, which will push or pull the blocks into place when the observers are updated. With redstone dust updating all the observers on a layer, we can control a whole line at a time. Then if we connect all the layers together, we can pick up or place a checkers piece at will. To accomplish that, I made a waterfall circuit, which was featured in my last map art machine, Connect 4. This allows us to activate all the layers at the same time, regardless of the height difference. Like usual, I got ahead of myself and forgot to include the crowned indicator. Let's put a simple yellow ring on the edge so it kind of looks like an actual crown. Instead of completely rebuilding the display cell, we can just integrate it by activating red, dropping the crown onto it, then spreading all the layers to make room for the yellow blocks, then filling in the gaps in the waterfall circuit. We will also add another waterfall circuit to control yellow. With the basic display cell complete, we can now copy this across the board. I can foresee, from making previous map art machines, that we will need to split the board down the middle, with half of the display cells leaning to the left and the other half leaning to the right. But for now, we are just going to get one side working. After copying the display cells, we can drop the inputs for each waterfall circuit and fill in the gaps. Now we are ready to copy this to the other side of the board. With the display cells complete on the Redstone flow, we can now move on to the next section, the Player Selector. In the last map art machine, we activated the waterfall redstone by a minecart on a detector rail. Since that worked so well, let's try that here. If we use a chest minecart, then we can put an item in it which will be detected by a comparator that will activate the crown on the display cell. We can keep black on a separate rail, then to kill a man, we can just drop the minecart down, which will clear the display. The black circuit is in the way, so we can offset it by one block. We also need to make black clear red and red clear black if one color lands on the other. But for now, let's just figure out the 4-way directional selector. At first, I thought of using slime blocks and sticky pistons to change the tracks, which is similar to the minecart station redstone from the last episode. The minecarts drop down onto the powered rail, and we can send a signal to choose left or right. Then if we copy this design to each side of the selector for up and down, then we can control our 4-way directional selector with just 2 signals, one to go left and right and another to go up and down. Let's copy this into place and double check everything lines up. It's good, so we'll add one for black, and yeah, this is already looking a little chaotic and confusing. But we can link up the inputs for each selector to simplify our inputs. Both sides of our black and red selectors get connected together by this blue line for east-west control. And the back of the selectors get connected together for north-south control. Then we can copy the directional selector to each display cell and start connecting the outputs of each cell to the corresponding input of where the minecart needs to go. For example, if a minecart gets selected for northeast, then it will go on the northeast rail, and that rail needs to connect to the northeast cell. I woke up rested and clear-headed the next day and realized the directional selector is way more complicated than it needs to be. There are no pistons or moving slime blocks in the new design, and we can select each direction with its own individual redstone line, instead of a combination of 2 redstone signals. This design gives us our 4 directions and a clear function that will be the default track selection, where the minecart just goes to the end and drops onto a return line. This seems to work, so let's add it under the player selector for red and black. Yeah, that already looks 10 times better. Also, we can trigger both red and black directional selectors simultaneously without breaking the game, because the directional selector only has to process one minecart at a time. I installed this backwards, so let's do a flipperoo. Because minecart rails are directional in Minecraft, now all 4 tracks are selected, so we have to invert the default signal with a redstone torch to make the default state of the directional selector to run the minecart off the end of the track again. Now to start the process of connecting the directional outputs to the inputs of their respective cells. There needs to be 2 lines, one for black and one for red, from each directional output to the red and black inputs of another cell. Don't forget to stop and test each rail as we build them to make sure everything runs smoothly. I ran into some rail connection issues and minecarts getting stuck, but by raising up these blocks, we can drop the minecart down onto the input rail for each player selector. I also decided to change the blocks supporting the rails to the same color as the redstone lines which activate that track. Makes much more sense that way. With the southeast rails done, let's work on the southwest rails. Easy enough, now the northeast rails. In the first episode of this series, I introduced the waffle circuit, and in the second episode, I dubbed the waterfall circuit, and in this third episode, we are using rails as logic. So does that make these rail lines Railstone? I think so. And finally, the northwest rails. With the rails for all 4 directions in place, we can start copying them over to the other display cells. After this extensive amount of copying, we need to test all the connections and fix any errors. I will spare you the couple hours it took. Let's just say it works. Now to take care of the edges. I will start with a corner as it has 2 unused connections. All we have to do is wrap the track back around to the input, so if anyone tries to run a piece off the board, then the minecart will return to the same cell. Now we just follow the same process for all the other edge cells. With that, our 4-way direction selector is done on our redstone flow. But what about the player selector? I sort of forgot to make red clear black and black clear red when building the player selector, so let's add it now. We can grab the signal from red here and run it down to control black, but bringing black back up is going to require some thinking. I was able to get it with just adding 1 piece of redstone dust and modifying the torch placement. The astute among you might have seen the problem with this design, but I didn't figure it out until later. For now, let's mark the player selector portion of the redstone flow as complete. We are building the reset next, which is just some redstone that activates both colors to drop any remaining minecarts. This will only be triggered at the end of a game to clear the game board. It's a simple, small circuit that came together quickly. And now we just have to copy the modified player selector and the reset circuit to the other display cells. It's as easy as that, and our reset portion of the redstone flow is complete. At this point, we have added most of the major redstone circuits to the game. So let's start bringing the inputs to the bottom of the map, where the control room will be. I switched the reset line color to magenta and found the space between the cyan and purple lines to run the magenta line to the other cells. This machine is getting to be a lot to comprehend, so to help keep track of cells as I install the magenta lines, I loaded each display cell with a minecart that would drop when the clear signal was connected. Little tricks like this can help to debug as we continue building the map art machine. Now let's bring the directional selector lines to the front. Cyan fits great right under our magenta reset line, and we can reach the cyan inputs like this. Repeat that process for all the other cells, and we can move on to purple, which will run parallel to cyan. Light blue will run directly below their inputs. Lastly, we will run blue underneath purple. The front of our map art machine is starting to look like a wall of color, and we still have more redstone to add. It was at this point I started to write down what each color represented, because I have never used so many different circuits before on a single project. We still have one major component to build, and that is the tile selector. Essentially, we are going to put 8 redstone lines for each row and 8 redstone lines for each column. This will give us intersections over each gray square. Then by activating one row and one column at a time, we can select an individual tile. A tile selector is important because it acts like a filter. When we send directional redstone signals or activation redstone signals, that signal goes to all the display cells at the same time, but only the one that is selected receives that signal. To make this work with redstone, we are going to use 2 torches on our input blocks, which both power our redstone dust, connected to a 3rd redstone torch. Only when both torches on the input blocks are turned off, meaning the row and the column are selected, does the 3rd torch turn on. That torch will power a piston to push a target block down, which will connect the activation signal to the display cell. Again, the activation signal is sent to all display cells, but only passes through to the selected cell via the target block. The target block powers a piston to push down a redstone block that then powers the reset circuit. This drops the minecart whether it is on red or black and sends it to the directional selector circuit. Just as with everything else, this circuit gets copied to the other cells and connected together, then brought to the front. Trying to fit everything is starting to get a little tricky, but we can still make it work. Let's use orange for the column selector and lime for the row selector. We have to slightly modify the circuit on the other cells to fit the redstone in, but it still works the exact same way. After everything is installed, we have 4 orange lines for the columns and 8 lime lines for the rows hiding just below. Now, the tile selector is complete on the redstone flow. It was at this point I realized that we don't have a minecart return. It's not part of the redstone flow because we didn't know that this machine would be mostly Railstone. Building a minecart return system is essential if we want to play more than one game. Now the minecarts have a way out. Let's figure out how they make their way in. This whole time I've been placing minecarts manually, but we won't rely on that to play the game. Setting the board is easy, as all we must do is install dispensers that will place the minecarts for us when the game starts. Place dispensers for red on the bottom 2 rows and black for the upper 2 rows. The dispensers will be controlled by this pink line, which only gets triggered once per game at the start. With all those dispensers in, we completed the set portion of the redstone flow. With that installed, we can now set and clear the board automatically for the first time. This test result is getting me excited to finish building the machine, but first we need to finish the minecart return system. Each dispenser needs a hopper on top and a rail to run across. This will allow us to refill the dispensers after each game. Now back to filling in the gaps in the rails on the minecart return system. I apologize if it feels like I am jumping back and forth a lot, but we are essentially building both ends of the system and connecting them together. In the corner here, we are going to build a minecart station to hold extra minecarts. It's kind of a minecart storage that effectively acts as a buffer. This is my first attempt where a minecart hits the cactus, then triggers the comparator to dispense another minecart. You can't see a dispenser here because it was late and I was too tired to see my mistakes. We will come back to this later. In the meantime, we can build the crowning circuit. A crown will happen when a color reaches the opposite side of the board. All this circuit requires is a single hopper that will drop an item into the minecart as it rolls into the station. That's it. Let's mark the crown portion of our redstone flow complete. We also must make sure this and other hoppers stay full, so they will be covered by our minecart return system. I went back to the minecart return station and installed the dispenser. My thought process here was every time a minecart enters the station, it leaves the game, so we add another minecart into the game. I then copied this minecart station to the other corner and modified it to fit in. After linking up all the green line rails, we are ready to copy and rotate this half of the board and build the playroom to control everything. Right before doing that, I realized that we have a tile selector, but no way for the player to know which tile is selected. So we need a tile indicator as well. We accomplish this by adding a single white block and piston to the bottom left of each display cell. This block will be controlled by a single bubble column. The bubble column will be controlled by the same small circuit that pushes the target block down for the activation signal, indicating the selected tile on the poster display. Now we can finish the board. We can copy and rotate the completed half of the board. I wish we could mirror it, but that would have caused the display cells to be in the wrong place. So now we have to rework our redstone transmission lines that are in the back and bring them to the front. Then we can work on connecting the two halves together, but there is still quite a few things we have to fix first. For starters, the tile indicators for the left half are in the wrong spot now, so we have to rework all those. The game set and crown is reversed colors, so we have to fix those too. The directional lines also had to be recolored. We achieved this by using the /fill command, and first converting the lines to the correct color in concrete, then back to wool. Lastly, because rails themselves are directional, now that we have flipped the design, we replace the redstone torches with repeaters on the rail switches, so the directional selector operates as intended. I marked all the unconnected rail lines with glowstone to identify which ones we need to finish. We are starting with the green return line by just dropping the carts here onto another line that runs to the corner of the board. Then I changed the minecart station for the third time. The comparator trigger isn't working how I want it, so let's rip that out and try something else. My next idea was to have the dispenser trigger on every move, or every other move, so I tried connecting it to all the directional lines redstone, but that didn't work either, and reverted back to a comparator design for now. Connecting up the rail lines in the middle was easy enough. We just have to route all the rails under the lime lines for the row selector. Now comes for the fun part, figuring out the controls. The hardest part here is trying to figure out how to toggle between the different rows or columns with just 2 buttons. I started with this dropper hopper design, with the bottom hoppers being locked by default. The idea was that there is only one item in the circuit, and if you want to toggle to the right, then power the dispensers which push the item up into a regular hopper which deposits it into the next dispenser. If you want to toggle to the left, then the bottom hoppers would unlock to allow the item to get sucked out of one dispenser and deposited into the previous one. I couldn't get this to work as intended, so I moved on to the next solution for this problem. I am building what's called a red coder in the Redstone community. And like most of you, I do not know how it technically works, but I know how to build and use it. What a red coder does is take a redstone signal strength of 0 to 15 and gives us a separate output for each signal strength. The input is this comparator and the outputs are the redstone torches. We will use 2 droppers pointed into each other to change the signal strength. The dropper works well since it only has 9 slots and we need 8 outputs, but the red coder has 16 outputs. So we will modify it to only use half of the outputs. It's not exactly every other torch, so I'm marking the outputs that work and deleting the rest. We will use 2 of these red coders, one for controlling the rows and one for the columns. To limit the droppers in controlling the red coder, there is 10 items between the 2. So if one is full, the red coder output is all the way to the right, and if the other is full, the output would be all the way to the left. Then we do the same for the lime color row selector. Here we need to route the other lines out of the way so that we can connect the red coder. With those in place, we can change the column or row selection with a press of a button. Oh no, we made it so we can select every square, even the white ones. To fix this, we are going to connect the rows together in pairs, which always gives us a visible selected tile on any setting. It also has the benefit of switching between players faster. To achieve this with Redstone, we will modify the row selector red coder to only 4 outputs, and connect the appropriate redstone lines. I could have reduced the number of transmission lines also, but I left them in and just connected them behind the red coder. The interface for this map art machine is going to look much better than the last 2 episodes, just consisting of our poster display surrounded by buttons. The 4 corner buttons represent the 4 directions that we can move each piece, and the other 4 buttons control the tile selector, up and down buttons for the rows, and left and right buttons for the columns. The last part of the interface is the on-off lever that will control the set and reset functions. We use a redstone torch connect to the lever to trigger the clear function when the lever is off. Another redstone torch coming off the reset line triggers the set function when the lever is flicked on. With that, the input section of our redstone flow is done, and the entire redstone flow is complete. But we are not done. The interface may be finished, but we still need to trigger the activation redstone. To do so, we will run redstone from each of the 4 directional lines to the light gray activation redstone line. Now we have a complete machine, but we still have to test and debug it. I am not so good at timing, so I installed these crude signal extenders on each directional line and delayed the activation signal to get it to work reliably. I think of the signal extenders as a gate that opens, and while the gate is open, the activation signal can pass through. The /tick freeze command helped me get the timing right, but I ended up modifying the signal extender too. I modified the minecart stations again to be triggered every time a move is made. Every turn, either 0 or 1 minecart is removed, either by killing or crowning, so by having it triggered every turn, we ensure the system is always full. I also reduced the number of minecart stations to just 1 station. At this point, I started debugging the machine and mostly just had to fix mistakes like rails misaligning or adding delay, so the directional and activation signals are synced. It was when I tried to hop another piece that I realized my mistake. When I modified the player selector earlier to clear the other player, I gave each circuit a permanent signal, meaning if red is here, then black is permanently open. So if black tries to hop red, then it just drops out. To fix this, we will have to turn the signals into a pulse. Let's see how we can achieve this. What if we use a simple hopper dropper? And yeah, that works. But how are we going to squeeze another in here for black? The solution was actually quite simple, by grabbing the signal with a target block to power the dispenser directly, and then the comparator points straight into the input block. Here's a better view of how this modified player selector works. Now to copy it for the other display cells. Debugging took several hours and mainly consisted of fixing rails, replacing repeaters, finding powered redstone dust, and unlocking hoppers. There was also this issue of the top dropper here being quasi-powered. It took a few hours just to do a full test, but everything works as intended. I had a lot of fun during this project, and even though we had to modify our redstone along the way, we never really got stuck. With that, Checkers is done. So I invited my friend over to play with me. Hey, thanks for dropping in. Would you like to play a game of checkers with me? You can start. You can play as red. Well, it looks like I won this round. Would you like to go for best 2 out of 3? Why do I keep inviting him? We can clear the board for the next game, but we are at the end of the video. One caveat I forgot to mention is for the poster display to update, there needs to be someone standing here holding a copy of the map. Thanks, Steve! So how did I do on my redstone? Rate me in the comments from 1 to 15 on the power of my redstone skills. Grab the world download on Patreon for free. Join the Discord to discuss map art with other makers, and for watching until the end, I am giving out a custom 1x1 map art. Leave your suggestion for a custom map art in the comments, and in 1 week from the video release date, I will make the most liked comment and share it for free. I am excited to see what suggestions you guys will come up with. Okay, I will see you in the next video, when we will see what's in box number 4.